The unexpected discovery. Mark had just moved into an old, creaky house on the edge of town. It was the perfect project for someone who loved to restore old buildings, but there was something about this house that felt different. From the moment he set foot inside, he couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the place was hiding secrets that had been buried for years. The house itself was a fixer-upper, built back in the 1800s. The walls were cracked, and the floors creaked beneath every step. Mark could already see the potential, though. He could turn this place into something amazing, if he could just get rid of all the dust and grime. The first job he tackled was the living room. It had a giant old wall that was falling apart, and it seemed like the perfect place to start. Mark spent hours swinging a sledgehammer at the wall, breaking through layers of old plaster. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he swung again and again, the heavy hammer striking the wall with a loud thud. Dust filled the air, and with each hit, the hole in the wall grew larger. He was so focused on his work that he didn't even notice the strange hum that began to fill the room. It was faint at first, but it grew louder as he kept going, like a distant, buzzing sound that seemed to come from deep within the house. The moment Mark broke through the last layer of plaster, a gust of cool air rushed from the hole, making him step back in surprise. His heart raced as he peered into the opening. There in the dark was something unusual. It wasn't just an empty space behind the wall. It was a hidden room. Mark stood still for a moment, unsure of what he was seeing. The room beyond was small, dimly lit, and filled with strange markings on the walls. The air inside smelled old and musty, but there was something else too, a faint metallic scent that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The room seemed completely untouched by time, as if no one had been there for centuries. Mark hesitated for a moment. It was a strange feeling, but he couldn't resist the urge to explore. He carefully crawled through the hole in the wall, the dust swirling around him as he stepped into the hidden room. The first thing that caught his eye was the strange symbols carved into the stone walls. They were like nothing he had ever seen before, glowing faintly, as if they were alive. It was as if the room itself was telling a story, one Mark couldn't quite understand. But it wasn't just the markings that caught his attention. His eyes slowly moved toward the far corner of the room, where something unusual lay. It looked like a figure, a person, but unlike anyone he had ever seen. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he approached. There, chained to the stone wall, was a girl. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the dim light. She had long hair that seemed to shimmer, even in the dark. Her features were delicate, yet there was something otherworldly about her, something Mark couldn't quite put his finger on. She was dressed in clothes that looked ancient, but they didn't seem to match anything from Earth's history. The most startling thing, however, was that she wasn't moving. She appeared to be unconscious, her body limp as she hung from the chains that bound her to the wall. Mark's mind raced. Who was she? How did she end up here, trapped in a hidden room for who knows how long? It was hard to believe, but it was clear this wasn't some ordinary person. Something was very wrong. He moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. As he examined her, Mark could feel a strange energy radiating from her. It wasn't just the marks on the wall, or the eerie hum that still filled the air. No, this girl herself seemed different. Mark's fingers brushed against her hand, and for a split second, he felt an electric jolt run through his body, almost like a spark of life flowing between them. Mark quickly pulled his hand away, his heart racing. What was happening? Was he imagining things, or had he really just felt that? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He needed to focus. This girl was in trouble. She needed help. But before he could act, something strange happened. The moment Mark touched her, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they seemed lifeless, blank, as though she were staring into nothing. But then, slowly, her eyes began to glow. A soft, almost unnatural blue light filled her pupils, and Mark froze. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. The hum in the room grew louder, and Mark could feel the temperature drop, as if the very air around him was changing. The girl's lips parted, and her voice, soft but somehow clear, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing. This was just the beginning. The girl was no ordinary human, and he had just uncovered something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The alien girl's identity. Mark stood frozen, his eyes locked on the alien girl as her glowing blue eyes continued to pierce through the dim room. The hum from the walls seemed to intensify, vibrating through the air like a low drone. Every instinct in him screamed to run, but his body refused to obey. He couldn't look away. The girl's voice, though soft, carried an undeniable strength. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "You shouldn't be here," she repeated, her voice now firmer, almost commanding. Mark's mind was racing. What was she? He couldn't wrap his head around it. She looked human at first glance, but there was no denying the unmistakable energy surrounding her. The glow in her eyes, the strange aura that seemed to surround her. She wasn't from Earth. But who, or what, was she? Taking a cautious step forward, Mark spoke, his voice shaking. Who are you?" The girl's eyes softened, and she blinked slowly, as though trying to remember something. For a brief moment, she seemed disoriented, as if the world around her had been out of focus for too long. I was asleep," she whispered, almost to herself. "For so long. I did not expect anyone to find me." Mark's curiosity piqued even more. He stepped closer, his breath catching in his chest. "What are you? What happened here?" He motioned around the room, the symbols on the walls catching the faint light in strange, shimmering patterns. The girl's expression shifted, a subtle sadness creeping into her gaze. "I am not of this world," she said quietly, as though speaking the truth that had been buried for centuries. "I come from a faraway place, a planet that is light years away from your own." She paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "I have been here for centuries, trapped." Mark's heart raced. "Centuries." His voice cracked. "You've been here all this time. Why? How?" Her eyes closed for a brief moment, as though the memories were painful to relive. When she opened them again, the glow in her eyes flickered. "I came to Earth long ago, during a war that tore apart my people. My ship was damaged, and I crash-landed here. The humans of this world. They did not understand my technology, my people. They thought I was a threat, and they locked me away." Mark took a step back, still processing the enormity of her words. She wasn't just some alien. She was a prisoner, trapped on Earth for as long as history had been written. She continued, her voice growing softer. "I was meant to be a messenger, to warn your world of the dangers beyond the stars. But they trapped me in this room, using a device to keep me in stasis, to keep me from waking up." She looked down at her shackled wrists. "The chains, they are not of your world. They were designed to hold me, to stop me from escaping." Mark felt his chest tighten as he realized the weight of her situation. A prisoner. Her life had been taken away from her by fear and misunderstanding. She had been stuck here, alone for so long. "I didn't know," Mark said quietly. "I had no idea you were trapped like this. How could I have?" He rubbed his temples, still trying to make sense of it all. The girl tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "It is not your fault. The people who did this to me are long gone. But the effects of their actions linger. I have been here for so long, forgotten by time." Mark looked around the room, noticing the strange markings once again. They looked ancient, almost alien in design. Some of them seemed to pulse with faint energy, as if responding to her presence. He wondered if the room itself held some kind of power. "So what now?" he asked. "What happens next?" The girl's gaze softened as she looked at Mark. "I do not know. I do not know what year it is, or how long I have been trapped here. I only know that the war I fled from is still ongoing, out there, beyond your stars." Mark took a deep breath. The war. You're saying the danger's still out there? The girl nodded slowly. Yes, it is still happening. My people, my civilization, they are scattered, broken by the war. But if the wrong factions find out I am here, I fear Earth will become a battleground. A cold shiver ran down Mark's spine. The weight of what she was saying hit him hard. Earth could be at the center of an intergalactic war. For the first time, Mark realized that his discovery was far bigger than a hidden room in an old house. It was a matter of life and death, for not just him, but for the entire planet. The girl seemed to sense his growing panic. Do not fear, she said softly. You have not stumbled into this place by chance. Perhaps it was fate that brought you here. You are the key to stopping what is to come. Mark's eyes widened. Me? How am I the key? The girl smiled faintly, though her eyes remained somber. Because you found me. Because you are here, and because there is no one else. She paused before continuing, her voice laced with a quiet determination. There are those who would do anything to capture me, to use me for their own gain. But you can help me. Mark felt a strange weight settle on his shoulders. He had always thought of himself as just a regular guy, a man who loved fixing up old houses. But now, standing in the dim, hidden room with an alien girl who had been trapped for centuries, he knew his life had just changed forever. There was no turning back. The girl's voice interrupted his thoughts. We must leave this place, Mark. Time is running out. Mark nodded, swallowing hard. I'm ready. Let's go. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that by helping her, he was opening a door to something far bigger and far more dangerous than anything he could imagine. The world was about to change, and Mark wasn't sure if he was ready for it. But it was already too late. Awakening the alien. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he stepped back from the alien girl, his heart racing. Everything about the situation was surreal, and the weight of the conversation they'd just had pressed heavily on his mind. He looked at the girl, her once unconscious form now awake, her glowing blue eyes filled with a depth that seemed to reach across galaxies. The air between them crackled with an energy he couldn't understand, and for the first time in his life, he truly felt small. There were so many questions, too many unknowns, but there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't leave her here. Not now. The girl seemed to sense his resolve. Her expression softened, and she slowly sat up, her movements graceful despite the chains that once held her. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice echoing in the chamber's stillness. You have no idea what this means to me. Mark didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. The girl wasn't just a prisoner. She was something far more important than he had first realized. She had been a part of something much larger, something cosmic. But even more pressing was the strange sense of destiny that seemed to surround her. He had stumbled upon her, and now the fate of the world, perhaps even the galaxy, hung in the balance. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. So you said you've been trapped here for centuries, he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. How did you survive? How did you stay alive all this time? The girl's eyes flickered, and she glanced down at her hands, which still glowed faintly. The markings that adorned her skin pulsed with light, as though in response to the question. She took a slow breath, as if gathering her thoughts. It wasn't easy, she said, her voice distant, as though recalling a memory from another lifetime. The humans who captured me. They created a device, something that kept me in stasis. It suspended time around me, preserving me. But it also made me forget. My memories, my body, everything was frozen. I was kept in a dreamless sleep, unaware of the world passing around me. For centuries, I could do nothing but wait, and all I could feel was the weight of my isolation. Mark felt a pang of sympathy. She had lived for centuries, trapped and alone, and yet she didn't appear bitter or angry. Instead, there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a sadness that had been building for hundreds of years, hidden away in the forgotten corners of the world. He watched her carefully as she stood, testing her strength. The chains, once so tightly wound around her wrists, were now loose, hanging lifelessly at her sides. She seemed to move with an elegance that Mark could only describe as otherworldly, her every movement carrying a grace that suggested a power far beyond anything he could comprehend. "You said you were sent here to warn us," Mark said after a moment, his voice steady now, but his mind still racing with questions. "What exactly are we being warned about? What's out there? What's coming?" The girl's gaze turned to the dimly lit walls of the hidden room. The symbols etched into the stone were faintly glowing, their meaning still unclear to Mark. She turned her eyes back to him, her expression serious. "The war I fled from. It is far-reaching. It is not just a conflict between two worlds. It is a war that involves many different factions from across the stars. Some are peaceful, but others, they are destructive. There are those who want to use Earth for its resources, to fuel their endless wars. They would enslave your kind, drain your planet dry, and leave nothing behind." Mark swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. Earth was not just a world of humans, struggling with their own conflicts and problems. It was a pawn in a much larger game, one that spanned the stars. His chest tightened as the realization hit him. Earth could be destroyed. He could be standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything. "Why Earth?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Why us? Why would they come here?" The girl's eyes darkened slightly, and she stepped closer to him. There was a tension in the air now, something almost palpable. "Because Earth is more important than you realize," she said, her tone low and urgent. "Your planet, it's a crossroads, a place where many paths intersect. The resources here, the energy. It's something that many powerful factions desire. But there's more. There's something on Earth, something hidden, that holds the key to winning this war." Mark blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Something on Earth? What do you mean? What's hidden here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to one of the walls, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols with a careful, almost reverent touch. Her expression was intense, focused. "These symbols," she began, "they are not just markings. They are a map to an ancient power buried deep beneath the surface of your world." Mark's breath caught in his throat. A map? A map to what? The girl's eyes met his, her gaze steady and serious. A weapon, a power that, in the wrong hands, could destroy not just your world, but entire civilizations. A force that could change the course of the war and the future of the universe. Mark took a step back, his mind reeling. A weapon. On Earth. He had no idea what to make of it, but the way she spoke, it was clear that whatever this was, it was something huge. Something dangerous. "And you think the others are looking for it?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. The factions I fled from. They believe that if they find it first, they will have the power to control the war and conquer the galaxy. That's why they've been searching for me. I've seen the signs, and I know they will come soon." A chill ran through Mark. He had no idea how to handle the weight of this information, how to process the reality that his life, and the life of every person on Earth, was now intertwined with a galactic conflict that was far beyond anything he could have imagined. But one thing was clear. This girl was his only chance to stop it. She was the key, and without her, Earth would be defenseless. "I don't know what to do," Mark admitted, his voice strained. "How can we stop something like this? How can I help?" The girl turned toward him, her expression softening for the first time. "By staying alive," she said simply. "By trusting me. Together, we may have a chance. But we must act quickly, Mark. The war is already at our doorstep." Mark nodded, the weight of her words settling in his chest. The journey ahead would be dangerous. He knew that now. But he also knew that there was no turning back. The fate of the world was now in his hands. The truth about the war. Mark had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, A simple guy who liked to fix things, a lover of old buildings and quiet projects. But standing there, in the cold, dim-lit room with the alien girl who had just revealed that Earth was at the center of an intergalactic war, Mark felt the weight of the universe pressing down on him. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The girl, who had introduced herself as Lyra, took a step back and began to pace slowly around the room. The glow from the symbols on the walls seemed to brighten as she moved, casting eerie shadows across the ancient stone. Her movements were graceful, purposeful, and Mark couldn't help but notice how completely different she was from any human he had ever met. She seemed ancient, like a being from another time, with knowledge far beyond anything Earth had yet discovered. "There are many factions in this war," she said, her voice carrying an air of authority that Mark wasn't used to hearing from anyone, let alone someone who had been trapped for centuries. "Some of them are peaceful, others are ruthless. But there is one faction that is the most dangerous, the one that has been hunting me for so long." Mark was already on edge, his mind still spinning from everything he had learned. "Who are they? What do they want?" Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes gleaming with the intensity of someone who had seen too much. "They are called the Xanteri. They are a race of conquerors, a species that believes in the total domination of other worlds. For centuries, they have been waging wars against anyone they perceive as weak, enslaving entire civilizations, and draining their planets of resources to fuel their endless hunger for power. They are the ones who have been searching for me. And they are the ones who will destroy Earth if we don't stop them." Mark felt his stomach tighten. He could almost feel the weight of their presence, a looming shadow over the Earth. He had no idea who these Xanteri were, but from Lyra's words, it sounded like they were a force unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. He couldn't even begin to imagine what it would mean for the human race to face a foe like that. "Why are they after you?" Mark asked. "What makes you so important to them?" Lyra's eyes grew darker, and she stepped closer to him. Her voice became quieter, but more urgent. "I am not just an ordinary alien. I am the last of my kind, a member of a civilization known as the Valerians. We were once a peaceful race, dedicated to exploring the stars and helping other civilizations. But we were caught in the crossfire of a galactic war, a war that the Xanteri started. We fought back, but we were outnumbered and outmatched." Mark could hear the sorrow in her voice, the weight of the loss she had endured. "So, the Xanteri wiped out your people?" Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes, my people were destroyed, wiped out by the Xanteri's thirst for power. But before they were annihilated, the Valerians created something, a weapon, a force that could defeat the Xanteri once and for all. It is called the starborn energy, a power so vast that it can alter the very fabric of reality itself. But it is also dangerous, so powerful that if it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. My mission was to protect it, to ensure that the Xanteri could never use it." Mark's mind was racing. A weapon capable of altering reality. The starborn energy sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but Lyra's eyes told him it was all too real. He had seen the power she could wield, and he could sense the depth of her knowledge. This wasn't just a story, it was a race against time. "You said the weapon is hidden here, on Earth," Mark said, trying to make sense of it all. "But why did they never find it? Why haven't the Xanteri taken over Earth already?" Lyra's gaze shifted to the floor, and she let out a deep sigh. "The Valerians hid the starborn energy deep beneath the Earth's surface, in a place where only those who understand its true nature can find it. The Xanteri do not know where it is, yet, but they know I am the key. I hold the knowledge, the map to its location, and that is why they have been hunting me for centuries." Mark felt a knot tighten in his chest. The Xanteri weren't just looking for an ancient weapon, they were looking for Lyra. She was the last living being who knew the way to the power that could either save or destroy the galaxy. "So they'll stop at nothing to capture you," Mark said slowly, piecing everything together. and they'll do whatever it takes to get their hands on this starborn energy. Lyra nodded gravely. Exactly. They will stop at nothing. If they find me, they will force me to lead them to the energy. And if they succeed in harnessing its power, they will be unstoppable. Earth will be their next target. It will become a battlefield, caught in the middle of a war that spans the stars. The Exanteri will take everything. Mark's stomach turned. He had known that things were dangerous, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. This was bigger than just a war between two sides. This was a battle for the future of the universe itself. And you think that the Exanteri are already looking for you here? Mark asked, his voice growing more anxious. Lyra's eyes darkened as she looked out of the hidden room's small window. They have been searching for me for centuries, Mark. They know that I am here. They will come. And when they do, we won't have much time to prepare. Mark's mind raced as he processed everything. He had no idea how to stop an alien race that could conquer worlds, let alone something as powerful as the starborn energy. He was just a regular guy after all. What could he do to fight against a force like the Exanteri? But as he looked at Lyra, something inside him stirred, a sense of responsibility, a need to protect her and his world. He didn't know how, but he knew he couldn't let Earth fall into the hands of the Exanteri. Lyra turned to him, her expression serious. We must leave this place. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it becomes. If the Exanteri are already on Earth, they are closing in on us. I need your help, Mark. You are the only one who can help me escape, and together, we might stand a chance. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment. The world had changed forever, and there was no turning back. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was in his hands. He nodded. I'm with you, Lyra. Whatever it takes. With that, their journey into the unknown began. The clock was ticking, and every moment they spent hidden in that room brought them closer to the danger that was coming for them. But Mark knew one thing for sure. He would do everything in his power to protect her, to stop the Exanteri, and to uncover the secrets of the starborn energy before it was too late. The pursuit begins. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the overgrown yard outside the house. Mark stood at the doorway, his hand gripping the rusted knob as he gazed out at the fading light. His mind felt like it was in a fog, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He had never imagined his life would take such a drastic turn. The girl, Lyra, wasn't just an alien. She was the key to saving Earth from a war that spanned the stars. The thought of the Exanteri closing in on them made his chest tighten with anxiety. There was no time to waste. Lyra stood behind him, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, once soft with the fear of being trapped for so long, had hardened with the quiet intensity of someone who had witnessed the fall of entire civilizations. She had warned him that they were not safe here, that the Exanteri would stop at nothing to capture her. Mark wasn't sure what kind of danger they were about to face, but one thing was certain. Their only hope lay in escaping before the alien faction found them. I think it's time we leave, Mark said, his voice steady but tinged with the gravity of the situation. He turned around to face Lyra, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation, but all he saw was determination. Lyra nodded, her gaze unwavering. We cannot afford to wait any longer. The Exanteri will be here soon. We must move quickly, and we must be smart. Mark took one last look at the house. It had been his home for just a few weeks, but now it felt more like a trap, one that would soon be discovered. Without a word, he stepped out onto the porch, his hand still tightly clutching the strap of the bag he had packed with the bare essentials. Lyra followed closely behind him, her movements silent, almost as though she were gliding. As they walked toward the car parked at the end of the driveway, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was an irrational thought, but the sense of being hunted had grown more palpable with every passing moment. His eyes darted around, scanning the area, but there was nothing unusual, just the typical quiet of a rural neighborhood. Yet, his instincts screamed that the danger was already there, lurking just out of sight. When they reached the car, Mark unlocked the doors and slid into the driver's seat. Lyra got in next to him, her fingers brushing against the seat as if she were unfamiliar with such mundane objects. Her presence in the vehicle, however, only served to remind him of how surreal everything had become. His life had gone from a routine of renovations and solitary work to a race for survival, tangled in an intergalactic war. "Where do we go?" Mark asked, his hands tightening around the steering wheel. "Do you have a place to hide? Somewhere safe?" Lyra's gaze was distant for a moment before she spoke. "There is a place, but it's far. We need to get out of this area first. The Xantari are more than likely tracking us by now." As Mark drove, the streetlights flickered in the distance, their glow a faint beacon in the growing darkness. The city was still a good distance away, but the further they got from the house, the more the tension in Mark's chest grew. He could feel it now, the pressure of the unknown, the weight of the task that lay ahead. He was no longer just a man trying to fix up a house. He was now part of a story that stretched across galaxies, where the fate of Earth rested on the shoulders of someone who didn't even know what to do next. Lyra's voice cut through the silence, bringing him back to reality. "You must understand, Mark, that the Xantari are not just a race of soldiers. They are predators, and they have technology far beyond anything humans can imagine. They can track us with ease, detect the slightest anomaly in their surroundings. If we don't stay hidden, they will find us. They are already here." Mark glanced at her, his grip on the wheel tightening. "How can we hide from something like that? They can track us across the planet." "They have many methods," Lyra said, her eyes narrowing as if recalling 1,000 battles. "But the Xantari are not invincible. They are vulnerable in ways they don't realize. If we can stay one step ahead of them, we might be able to disrupt their tracking systems. I know how to do it, but it will require us to get to a secure location where we can hide long enough to formulate a plan." Mark nodded, trying to process everything. Every word she spoke sounded like it was from a different world, a world he had no experience with. But he had no choice now. They had to survive. They had to find this secret power that could stop the war before it reached Earth, and they had to do it without getting caught. "I'm just a guy who fixes houses," Mark said, trying to break the tension. "How am I supposed to help with all of this?" Lyra turned to face him, her gaze intense yet filled with an odd kind of reassurance. "You're more important than you realize, Mark. The Xantari believe I am the key to the starborn energy, but you have something they can't track. You have human ingenuity, a mind that doesn't think like theirs. That's why you're here. You'll help me figure out how to stop them." Mark felt a surge of hope mixed with doubt. He was just an ordinary guy. How could he stand up to an enemy like the Xantari? He looked at Lyra, whose confidence seemed to give him a sense of purpose. Maybe, he thought, just maybe, together they had a chance. The cars sped through the winding roads, the hum of the engine blending with the soft rhythm of Mark's thoughts. He tried not to focus on the growing dread that gnawed at the edges of his mind. He couldn't afford to. Not now. The road ahead was long, and it was filled with dangers they could barely comprehend. As they turned onto a remote forested highway, Lyra's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. "We're close," she said, her voice low but steady. "Once we reach the location, we will need to stay off the grid. The Xantari will use every method at their disposal to find us. But the place I'm taking you is hidden, protected." Mark nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. The more Lyra spoke, the clearer it became that the stakes were higher than he had ever realized. There were forces out there, far beyond his understanding, that could shape the future of the entire galaxy. And the more he thought about it, the more one thing became clear. He wasn't just protecting an alien girl. He was fighting to protect the human race from an enemy that had no mercy, no compassion. The sound of tires crunching over gravel brought Mark back to the present. Lyra's gaze was fixed ahead, her focus razor-sharp. He glanced at her, feeling a sense of purpose settle in his chest. Whatever happened next, they couldn't stop. The Exanteri were coming, and there was no turning back now. They were in this together, and for the first time, Mark understood what it meant to fight for something far bigger than himself. A hidden power revealed. The night was dark, and the forest around them was dense and silent. Mark could feel the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders as he drove, the road now a winding trail through thick trees that seemed to close in around them. The headlights of the car barely pierced the thick canopy overhead, casting everything in shadow. But Lyra, beside him, seemed completely at ease, her sharp eyes scanning the road and the woods around them like a predator on the hunt. "We're almost there," she said, her voice calm but filled with the urgency of someone who knew just how precarious their situation was. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel, his fingers trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. He had never felt so far out of his depth. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a man trying to survive, trying to keep Lyra safe from enemies that seemed impossible to fight. But with each passing mile, he realized the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. Lyra wasn't just any alien. She was the key to an ancient power, a weapon capable of reshaping the future of the galaxy, and the Exanteri were closing in. As they neared a small clearing, Lyra motioned for him to stop. Mark pulled the car to the side of the road, and the engine's hum faded into the quiet of the night. The woods seemed to hold their breath, the air thick with the scent of earth and pine. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves and the soft chirp of crickets. "This is it," Lyra said. "Get out and follow me." Mark hesitated for a moment, the weight of the moments settling in. They were no longer just running from danger. They were about to step into something ancient, something hidden. He had no idea what to expect, but if there was even a chance to stop the Exanteri, he had to trust her. He grabbed the bag he packed earlier and followed her into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around them, their trunks gnarled and twisted, as if they had witnessed centuries of secrets. Lyra moved with purpose, her steps quick and silent, as if she was following an invisible path only she could see. Mark struggled to keep up, his breath catching as he tried to match her pace. After a few minutes of walking in silence, Lyra stopped in front of a large boulder, its surface covered in moss and lichen. She pressed her hand against it, and for a moment Mark thought nothing had happened. But then, to his amazement, the boulder began to shift, moving aside with an eerie groan as if it were alive. The earth beneath their feet seemed to tremble slightly, and the air grew heavy, charged with an energy Mark couldn't quite explain. What is this?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra turned to face him, her expression serious. "This is where the starborn energy is hidden. The Valerians built a secret sanctuary here, a place protected by the power of the earth itself. It's been kept hidden for millennia, waiting for the right moment." Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the shifting stone, disbelief and awe sweeping over him. Beneath the surface of the world he knew, hidden away in the depths of the earth, was an ancient power capable of changing everything. The weapon that could end the war, or bring about untold destruction. Lyra stepped forward, her hand glowing faintly with the same energy that marked her skin. As she placed her hand on the stone, the ground before them rumbled again, and a hidden passageway revealed itself, a dark, narrow tunnel leading deep into the earth. "This is where it begins," Lyra said, her voice filled with both caution and determination. "Once we enter, there is no turning back. The Exanteri will stop at nothing to find this place, and they will try to use any means necessary to break through." Mark swallowed hard but nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The tunnel in front of him was dark and foreboding, but this was their only hope. They had to uncover the starborn energy before the Exanteri did, or else Earth would be caught in the crossfire of a war that could destroy everything. As they descended into the tunnel, Mark's footsteps echoed in the darkness. The air was cool and damp, and the walls were lined with strange symbols, similar to those Mark had seen in the hidden room in Lyra's sanctuary. These symbols seemed to pulse with a faint energy, as though they were alive, guiding them deeper into the earth. The further they went, the more the tunnel seemed to shift and change. It was as if the very earth beneath them was shifting, reacting to their presence. Mark could feel the tension growing, an invisible force pushing against him, as though the tunnel itself was testing them. "We're getting close," Lyra said, her voice steady but tinged with a quiet urgency. "The starborn energy is sealed in a chamber ahead. Only those who know the ancient ways can unlock it. We must be careful." They rounded a sharp bend in the tunnel, and ahead, Mark saw a faint glow emanating from deep within. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, brighter and more vibrant than any light he had ever known. As they approached, the glow intensified, bathing the walls in an ethereal light. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "The starborn energy." Mark's breath caught in his throat. The chamber before them was unlike anything he could have imagined. The walls were lined with strange crystalline structures that pulsed with a soft light. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and atop it lay an object so beautiful, so alien, that it took Mark a moment to fully comprehend what he was seeing. It looked like a crystal, but it was unlike any crystal he had ever seen. It was long, twisting, and it seemed to hum with energy, resonating with a power that Mark could feel deep in his chest. "This is the source of the starborn energy," Lyra said, her voice reverent as she stepped forward. "It is not just a weapon. It is a force of creation, a power that can alter reality itself. It is capable of healing or destroying. If used correctly, it can bring peace to the galaxy. If misused, it will bring ruin." Mark stood in awe of the crystal, its energy vibrating in the air around him. It was both terrifying and beautiful, like a sleeping giant that could either change the world or crush it beneath its weight. He could feel its power, its potential, but he also understood the immense danger it posed. "We need to be careful," Lyra warned again. "The Exanteri will stop at nothing to take this from us. We cannot let them find this place." Just as she spoke, the ground beneath them trembled violently. Mark's heart skipped a beat as the chamber shook, dust falling from the ceiling. It was the unmistakable sound of something massive approaching. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice hardening. "We don't have much time." Mark's pulse raced. The Exanteri had found them. The fight for the starborn energy had begun, and the fate of Earth and the galaxy was about to be decided. The final stand. The tremors in the earth grew stronger, and the air became thick with tension. Mark's heart hammered in his chest as the ground shook beneath his feet. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes narrowed with determination as she gazed at the crystal in the center of the chamber, its soft, pulsating glow now brighter than ever. The starborn energy was within reach, but so was their imminent destruction. Mark's mind raced. The Exanteri were closing in. It was only a matter of time before they breached the chamber, and they would stop at nothing to take the starborn energy for themselves. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was on the line. There was no more running, no more hiding. The time for action had come. "Lyra, what do we do?" Mark asked, his voice tight with urgency. He wasn't a soldier, and he had no idea how to fight an alien army, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let the Exanteri take control of the starborn energy. He would do whatever it took to protect it. Lyra's expression was resolute, her eyes glowing faintly as she stepped toward the pedestal. "We fight," she said, her voice low but filled with unwavering conviction. "We protect the starborn energy at all costs. The Exanteri won't stop until they have it. But we have something they don't: the will to fight for what's right." Mark swallowed, his throat dry. He could feel the weight of her words. The odds were against them. The Exanteri were ruthless, technologically advanced, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy everything in their path to get what they wanted. But Lyra was right. This was their only chance, and if they didn't fight now, Earth, and all of humanity, would fall under the Xantary's rule. As Lyra reached out toward the starborn energy, her fingers brushed against the crystal. The room seemed to hum in response, the energy intensifying as she whispered something in an ancient language that Mark couldn't understand. The crystal trembled as if it were alive, reacting to her touch. For a moment, the entire chamber felt like it was breathing, the energy flowing through the air like a storm waiting to break. "We must use the energy to its fullest potential," Lyra said, her voice filled with an intensity that sent a chill down Mark's spine. "But I can't do it alone. I need you to trust me, Mark. We must unlock its full power together." Mark hesitated, his mind racing. What was she asking? But he didn't have time to question it. He nodded, his hand shaking as he stepped forward to stand beside her. Together, they reached for the crystal, their hands just inches apart. The moment they touched it, a surge of energy coursed through the room, an explosion of light and power that felt like it was tearing the very fabric of reality. The ground beneath them cracked, and the chamber seemed to bend and warp. Mark's vision blurred as the energy swept through him, filling his body with a strange warmth, then a coldness that took his breath away. He could feel it, the immense power of the starborn energy, flowing through him, connecting him to Lyra, connecting him to the very heart of the galaxy itself. For a split second, Mark thought he might lose control. The energy was overwhelming, like trying to hold a star in his hands. But Lyra's presence anchored him. She was there, guiding him, and together, they focused the power, channeling it into something that could protect them, something that could stop the Xantary. And then, just as the chamber seemed to reach its peak, the ground trembled again, this time more violently. The walls of the cavern began to crack, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The Xantary were here. Through the fissures in the stone, Mark could see them, their alien forms, dark and foreboding, moving quickly toward the chamber. Their ships, sleek and menacing, hovered just above the surface, their weapons aimed at the entrance. The Xantary had arrived in full force. "We don't have much time," Lyra said, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. She tightened her grip on the crystal, her eyes glowing with the intensity of the power they were now harnessing. "Mark, we need to push the starborn energy beyond its limits. If we can do this, we can create a barrier, a shield strong enough to stop their advance." Mark nodded, his pulse racing as the energy inside him intensified. He could feel it, the raw power of the starborn energy, pulsing through every cell in his body. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. He felt both invincible and vulnerable, connected to something far greater than himself. With a deep breath, Lyra closed her eyes and began to chant again in that ancient language. Mark couldn't understand the words, but he felt their weight. They weren't just words. They were commands, instructions passed down through generations of her people. The air around them began to crackle with energy as Lyra poured everything she had into the crystal, pushing it to its limits. Mark followed her lead, focusing every ounce of his will on the energy coursing through him. He could feel the starborn energy resonating with the earth itself, building into something monumental. The crystal in his hand began to glow brighter, its light blinding in its intensity. The very walls of the chamber seemed to hum with the force they were unleashing. Then, with a final, deafening surge, the crystal unleashed a shockwave of energy so powerful that it shook the entire cavern. The ground cracked open, and a massive energy shield erupted around the chamber, expanding outward in a burst of brilliant light. Mark felt the force of it reverberate through his body as the shield formed, creating an impenetrable barrier around them. The Xantary ships slammed into the barrier with an earth-shattering crash. Their weapons fired, but the energy shield absorbed the blasts effortlessly, shimmering with each impact. The ships recoiled, unable to penetrate the force that Mark and Lyra had created together. The Xantary were temporarily halted, their once unstoppable advance now thwarted by the power of the starborn energy. But even as the shield held strong, Mark knew this wouldn't last forever. The Exanteri were relentless, and they would adapt. This was only a temporary reprieve. "Lyra, we can't keep this up forever," Mark said, his voice strained with the effort. "What do we do next?" Lyra turned to him, her face lit by the glow of the shield. "We must finish what we started. The starborn energy is not just a weapon, it is a force of creation. If we can channel it properly, we can turn the tide of the war. But to do that, we need to focus all the energy into one final strike. It will drain everything we have, but it will stop them. For good." Mark nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He didn't know if he was ready for what was about to happen. But there was no choice. They had to act now. Together, they focused their energy on the crystal once more, pushing everything they had into one final, concentrated burst. The starborn energy flared with blinding light, and Mark felt his body burn with the intensity of the power they were unleashing. The air around them hummed, vibrating with an almost painful force as the energy built to its peak. And then, with a flash that lit up the entire sky, the power of the starborn energy erupted. A shockwave of pure, unrelenting energy surged outward, annihilating everything in its path. The Exanteri ships disintegrated in an instant, their once menacing forms reduced to dust by the sheer force of the blast. The chamber shook violently as the power rippled through the earth, but Mark didn't feel it. He was lost in the energy, his mind consumed by the raw force they had unleashed. He could feel the war being halted, the threat of the Exanteri collapsing in on itself. As the light faded, the shield around them dissipated, and the cavern grew quiet. Mark and Lyra stood in the center of the chamber, their bodies drained, their strength gone. But they had done it. The Exanteri were defeated. Earth was safe, at least for now. Lyra turned to Mark, her eyes soft with gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark nodded, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. "We did." But even as the silence of victory settled over them, Mark knew this was only the beginning. There were other wars out there, other dangers. The starborn energy had saved them, but there would always be a fight ahead. The future of the galaxy was still uncertain. But for now, Earth was safe, and that was enough.